right now, hey?
Yeah, that's
that's all right. That doesn't matter. Okay, I can't. That's as good as I'm going to get. Right, hi everybody. So beyond medication, supporting your thyroid health. So I am George Conway. I am thyroid specialist and founder of the Thyroid Clinic. Recently upgraded to the Thyroid Clinic Plus. So beyond thyroid hormone replacement, as those of you all know who work with my clinic, I'm all about optimizing thyroid hormones, and it's, in my view, the most important thing that you can do for your thyroid. But that doesn't mean to say it's the whole story, and it certainly isn't, because thyroid health is also physiological, nutritional, and psychological. So I want to talk very, very briefly, because I know we've only got a little bit of time, about diet and nutrients, sleep, mental health and stress, exercise and movement, comorbidities and whole body, and then life. And I put life at the end. I'm not actually going to talk about life, but it's one of the things that I often say to my patients is, I can sort out your thyroid, I can help you with your nutrition, I can help you with everything else, but I'm not going to be able to change your life. And life is stressful. And no matter what we do, life will always be stressful. And that will always have impacts on our thyroid. What we need to try and do is to make sure that that hormone resilience underneath it is strong so we can manage that life. So diet and nutrient support. Food first. So by that, I mean a good, balanced, consistent diet. It helps production of thyroid hormones. It helps conversion of thyroid hormone. Don't fast. Fasting is all the rage at the moment for us thyroid patients. It's not the greatest idea. It'd be interesting to see what Nicole says about this. You might have different ideas. But physiologically, fasting actually increases reverse T3. So reverse T3 is the inactive form of active T3 and will actually block your active T3 at a cellular level. So fasting, although a lot of us put on a lot of weight when we're unwell and we want to try and lose that weight and we think fasting is going to be the quickest way, actually in the long term, it can be worse for us. Key nutrients: protein, selenium, which actually you can just get from a couple of Brazil nuts a day, zinc, omega-3. Then also replace any deficiencies that you've got. Test iron, folate, vitamin D, and B12. And if you need those supplements, take them. Stable blood sugar also really helps energy, mood, and cortisol balance. And part of that is eating protein with your carbs. So if you have a big heavy carb hit, that is going to cause blood sugar issues. My thing about diet, I'm not a massive, you must not eat this, you must not eat that. I'm about minimizing your ultra-processed food and maximizing your whole foods. Or as I've written, actually maximize your whole foods. I'll change that. Sleep and stress regulation. Again, another thing I'm often talking about, the triangle of hormones: thyroid hormones, sex hormones, stress hormones. Stress hormones these three hormones will all impact one another. And that's why during menopause, perimenopause, even in around puberty, in and around childbirth, we're having massive stress. Our body's going through an internal stress, and that then affects your thyroid itself. So you've got the big changes in sex hormones, big changes in stress hormones, and then that affects your thyroid. So if we can minimize that stress as much as we can outside of what's going on in your body, then that will obviously help things. So sleep is one of our biggest stressors in life, a lack of sleep. So sleep loss increases cortisol, which reduces the T4 to T3 conversion, the big thing in thyroid. Chronic stress, which is something that modern life gives us, we are all under a low-level chronic stress, can actually blunt T4 to T3 conversion as well. On the flip side, restorative sleep improves our immune and metabolic balance. So with all of that, we're looking for ways to manage stress. For me, it's breath work, cold dipping. I love cold dipping. That's a whole nother thing we could talk about someday and how that works with thyroid. Nature, whatever it is that suits you. Therapy if you need it. Whatever it is that's going to help your stress levels. Those are really my stress managements. Aim for rhythm, consistent sleep and wake times support that hormone balance. So again, it's about making that sleep as restorative as possible. Exercise and movement, also part of the stress thing often, but also just really important generally for your health. So it's one of the, another thing that I see with my patients who come to me, they're often sitting there going, you know, I've done everything, I exercise, I do this, that, and the other. And actually, sometimes it comes down to the fact they're actually over exercising, and that is a stress on your body in itself. So that can overtraining increases cortisol, can worsen fatigue, also, of course, can increase weight gain, because if your cortisol's high, that's when you put on your fat around your belly. So consistent, moderate activity is going to improve that metabolism and then has a knock-on effect on your mood. Prioritize strength, flexibility, and gentle aerobic exercise. Movement shouldn't exhaust you. Movement should feel good. It should energize you. This is very brief, but that's what we needed, really. Comorbidities. I mean, this is a massive topic that I could go into forever and a day. But actually, thyroid isn't always the cause of everything. Look at other things. Is there something else that we're missing? Do actually you need some HRT? Are there mental health issues, which may or may not have come from thyroid in the first place? But equally, our human beings, we are very psychological beings. So if we've become very depressed throughout being hypothyroid and not being optimized, that doesn't mean that suddenly optimizing your thyroid hormones is going to magically cure your mental health. May sometimes, but it may be that there's also issues there that need dealing with. The flip side to that, of course, is that often when you have optimal thyroid hormones, you feel more able to manage those mental health issues. Collaboration between your medical and lifestyle practitioners is key. And by that, I suppose, I mean, again, I'm often, in my team, we have a whole team of nutritionists. We're actually looking at getting a psychologist out of the, just by the by. But we need to all talk. So if I know you're seeing, as a doctor, if I know you're seeing a nutritionist, I need to know that we're on the same page, that we're not pulling, because that in itself causes a stress. And actually, the biggest key to me for you guys is empowering you. If you feel that you are empowered to take those small, sustainable steps, you will do it. If I give you too much to do, you won't. So if I give you small steps each time, we have a chance of it working. Take home, very simple, optimal medication. And I will stress again, that is the biggest key. Balanced diet, good sleep and stress management, supportive exercise equals health and vitality. And I call it the snowball effect. And actually, I looked at this picture and it's gone slightly wrong. It needed an arrow from energy to exercise to eat better. But there we go. The snowball effect, a positive snowball effect. And I see this time and time again. We start off with a very small snowball and we get the thyroid hormones, and then we find that the patients feel better, and then they're empowered, and then they say, I've been eating better, and then they start to say, I've been exercising, and then that whole thing feeds back around, and then they all feel better, and it just keeps going and going and going. So the snowball effect, it's really powerful. When we don't feel well, we don't eat well, we don't exercise, we can't be bothered. When we feel well, that all starts to come in itself. So there you go. That's my very short take on outside of thyroid hormone.
Thank you. Thank you, Georgina. Just one quick question before we move on. Is somebody's asked in the chat is, can you clarify what you mean by fasting?
So we will, let me see if I can just come out of this. That stopped here. There we go. So we will all and should probably all have at least 12 hours overnight. So by 12 hours, I mean we should all stop eating round about 8 o'clock and then we should all start to eat around 8 o'clock. So 12 hours is fine, but anything beyond that, we're starting to cause trouble. So 10 to 12 hours at a max, anything else. So I can't even think what they all are. It's all these 5-2 and whatevers. They're not actually great for thyroid patients at all.
Okay, good. Hopefully that clarifies that one. And then that leaves us brilliant on, as we're talking about nutrition in particular, to Nicole.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, you want me to just, you ready for me to go?
Yeah, ready for you
jump
to
straight
go.
in. Okay. So I'm not sure how many of you know me on the call. I have done a couple of other talks for Thyroid Trust, and I know we have done, can people still watch the nutrition ones that we've done?
Absolutely, they can.
Yeah. So we've done kind of deep dives, haven't we? Or, as deep as you can get in an hour, but we have done quite a lot on nutrition. So those are still up there and available for people. So I did want to make today a little bit different, not just sort of do the same thing again. So I sort of want to talk through my 5 kind of top tips, I guess, for you as thyroid patients, if you're starting to look at a holistic approach. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a functional medicine practitioner and a registered nutritional therapist. I would say, so I run my own clinic. I have the Good Health Clinic. I do a lot of thyroid. So we're an autoimmune clinic. So I particularly on the side of Hashimoto's and Graves. So I will sort of touch on that a little bit. The first thing I would say is know your thyroid. I cannot tell you how many people come into clinic and they don't know whether they are hypo or Hashis or hyper or Graves, whether they have that autoimmune picture. So that is the first thing I would say. Definitely make sure you know. And then this is not all doctors. I'm very sure that if you see Dr. Conway, she's going to tell you exactly what you've got and she'll be running blood panels. But I do get people who come who have only had TSH with their doctor and they really don't know what the diagnosis is. On my intake form, I have, you can write what diagnoses you have, and there's also a box to tick if you have an autoimmune disease. And I can't tell you how many people write Hashimoto's or Graves and do not tick the autoimmune box. So my first big tip is know what you've got. Make sure you know what thyroid condition you've got. If you don't, ask. And if your doctor won't do the bloods, then come and see somebody like Dr. Conway or myself and get a full proper panel of bloods done and know. The steps that you take to support your health, including the nutrition that we will touch on, does differ based on that information. So based on what you have. The second thing I would say is track your thyroid. So many people who come to me who've sort of said, oh, I've been getting progressively worse or not been getting better, and they haven't had a blood test done since they were diagnosed. So, sometimes it's maybe 5-10 years and they haven't had another blood test done. So do track, make sure you know what's going on, particularly if it's autoimmune and there's those antibodies going on. A little side note on that is you can't compare your antibodies to other people's. That's something that people tend to do. They will panic if their antibodies are higher than somebody else's. Don't compare your antibodies to other people's. Just know what yours are and compare them to your last set of results. But do try and track your thyroid and know what's going on. So that would be tip number 2. Thirdly, I would say understand how your thyroid works. So many people don't understand it and don't really know what the different thyroid hormones are, or don't understand which parts can go wrong. And this is, for example, why sometimes medication is not enough. So your medication, if we take Hashimoto's, for example, or hypothyroid, and you're on levothyroxine, which is the most common kind of scenario, that's working on your TSH, but it's not necessarily working on the entire thyroid pathway. So there's other things that can be going wrong. You might not be converting well. So Dr. Conway touched there on your T4 and your T3, and you might not be converting T4 to T3 very well. Your medication is not going to help with that. There's other things you can do, dietary, lifestyle, but medication doesn't help with that. You may not be taking it up very well. So may not be taking the T3 up very well into your cells. And again, the medication isn't going to be helping with that. So understanding the thyroid, knowing the different parts of the pathway that can go wrong, and understanding why medication alone, and yes, it's a very important step, and I'm not saying don't take your medication, because you absolutely should, but it's one step, it's one part of the puzzle, and you need to understand why there's other parts that you sort of need to look at. And then step number 4, which is probably where I really kind of come in as a functional medicine practitioner, is finding the root causes. And Dr. Conway has already touched on the one that I was going to say was my biggest one, which is stress. Most people that come through my clinic who have thyroid, stress somewhere along the line is the biggest root cause. And that can be, I think people get a little bit nervous when we say stress, because I think that maybe they've been a lot to quite a few different doctors. They've maybe been told, oh, you're maybe just stressed, or you're just tired, been dismissed a little bit. So when you sort of say to people, oh, we need to look at stress, I think sometimes people do, they feel a little bit like we're maybe dismissing them again. But I think the thing to say about stress is it's physical and emotional stress. So it could be the emotional stress, it could be work stress, home stress, having an ill parent, could just be busy life and hustle culture. It could be sort of all of that side of things. It can be something physical. So it can be having an illness, having a virus, having surgery, having, pregnancy. That's why we see a lot of thyroid come up through that sort of time as well with the hormones. It's all a stress on the body. Not sleeping well, again, like Dr. Conway said, again, another stress on the body. So if we say to you stress, we're not necessarily just saying, oh, you're stressed out and trying to dismiss it. So we are talking, it's a bigger picture when we're looking at stress. All of these different things impact your adrenals, and there's a huge connection between those adrenals and the thyroid and the sex hormones as well, as Dr. Conway said, but particularly if we're talking about stress, this adrenal and thyroid connection. And the adrenals and the thyroid, they're all part of that same endocrine system, and they really do impact your metabolism as well. So if we're talking about nutrition and diet, then stress is going to have an impact here. And it's sometimes why people are struggling with that sort of losing weight or energy levels, or weight fluctuations sometimes if it's not difficulty losing weight. And all of that can help with that can impact that, leading to more fatigue, which can be a real problem for people with thyroid. Other sort of root causes that we look at as well as the stress picture is things like your gut health. The gut has a big impact on the thyroid hormones. Generally, it has a big impact on your health anyway, but we always look at gut health. Infections as well, so low-lying infections. If you've got things like, particularly things like Epstein-Barr virus, so things that we can find that some people have them where they're reactivated. Some people just have low-lying levels of different viruses in the body, and we find if we bring the viral load down, it can really help. Things like mold toxicities, there's lots of different root causes. So yes, we need to look at the thyroid, but we also need to take a whole body approach and look at what else might be impacting. Is it stopping your thyroid hormones from balancing? Is it driving the autoimmunity in you? So that's really important as well. And then number 5 is then knowing what to do. So how to support your thyroid. And obviously these different root cause things that are going on are going to change what we would do. If somebody's got mold toxicity, we need to deal with that. Somebody's got viral load, we need to deal with that. Somebody's stressed, we need to work on the adrenals. So things will change. But there are some things that we sort of can recommend for generally for most people with thyroid, and always check with your practitioner before you do things. But generally there are things we can sort of touch on. And the first of those obviously is nutrition. Gluten is usually the big one that I get asked about. It's usually the first thing everybody will ask. What I say with gluten and thyroid is, particularly if you're autoimmune, and this is another reason to find out whether you have Hashimoto's or Graves, and make sure you understand what that means for the body. If I am very much like Dr. Conway, I don't like to tell people to cut foods out of the diet. However, my one kind of caveat to that is if you have autoimmunity and you have Hashimoto's or Graves, in this case, if we're talking thyroid, and you're not feeling better, gluten needs to go. And that's the first thing that we should try. It doesn't necessarily mean gluten needs to be out all the time. It does get demonized a lot. I think the thing with gluten is that it's changed. A lot of people sort of say, oh, my grandparents ate gluten and they were absolutely fine. What they ate back then was very different to what we eat now. We're eating hybridized grains. They've been, genetically modified. People are more reactive to them. Ancient grains are best. So if you are still eating gluten, ancient grain is the way to go. It is the reason actually why we see some patients who can go to places like Italy and France, and they'll come back and say, I had a bowl of pasta and I was absolutely fine. And then they'll go and try a bowl of pasta from a supermarket in the UK and they'll be really fatigued and really ill for the next few days. And it's because places like Italy do still use the ancient grains. So they're using different types of grain to what we're using here. So in the UK, particularly, gluten can be a problem, particularly with autoimmune. So if you have that autoimmune thyroid, the reason being is it's something to do with something called molecular mimicry. So the protein structure in the gluten is similar to thyroid tissue, to the protein in the thyroid tissue. And then we get this sort of molecular mimicry where your body is not recognizing the difference, and we can get the thyroid being attacked. That's a very basic example of or description of what's happening. The other thing with gluten is that actually, particularly if you've got Hashimoto's, the vast majority of people with Hashimoto's have been found in studies to have at least one of the HLA-DQ gene, which are the genes that cause celiac. So even if you're not celiac, and to be celiac, you have to have multiple of these genes. If the vast majority of you have got at least one, you're going to be at least a little bit sensitive. So generally we do find, this is Hashimoto's specifically, generally we do find people with Hashimoto's do have one or more of these genes and are at least sensitive to gluten. So the first thing to try, and I'm not a big advocate for cutting things out, but it is something that we do with thyroid patients, particularly if symptoms are not improving, or we're not seeing antibodies come down on test results. That's something else that we may then say we need to give that a go. The other one people always ask about is dairy. So molecular mimicry again has been found in studies with dairy. It's to do with a protein called casein in the dairy, which again is similar to sort of thyroid tissue. So we're talking again autoimmune with this. If you're not autoimmune and you just have hypothyroid or hyperthyroid, then it's less sort of concerning that we cut these out. So we may try reducing them. We may just try and get you on the right types like the ancient grains, things like that. But if you do have that autoimmune, it is something that you might want to consider. But like I said, don't like cutting too much out. So let's talk about what you should be eating instead, which is always more fun, without personalizing it to your adrenals and gut and thyroid and brain and immune system and, you know, all the other things that we need to consider if we're building an actual nutrition plan for people. We can kind of look at some certain things. One of the big things, and I think probably the best diet, and this really is for thyroid, but I mean, this really would go down for anybody, really. This would be a benefit. And that is the anti-inflammatory diet. So looking at that sort of anti-inflammatory Mediterranean type of way of eating. Chronic inflammation worsens thyroid symptoms, and that's just a fact. It exacerbates autoimmune responses. So if you do have the autoimmune side as well, it's going to do that as well. It also further disrupts things like your metabolic system, your hormone system, so endocrine system, so those stress hormones, sex hormones as well. And if you have the autoimmunity, then inflammation can also trigger autoimmune flares. When we get those autoimmune flares, that means you could have a flare-up of worsening of the thyroid condition. It also means it could trigger another thyroid condition. We know that once you've got one thyroid condition, on average, you'll end up with 5. If you don't kind of do anything, that's what the sort of studies have shown, that there is kind of, we start collecting them. So it is kind of important to make sure that you keep this chronic inflammation under control and we watch that sort of autoimmune side of things. So in terms of what you eat for that, herbs and spices, really important, 2 at each meal every day, which is a lot more than what most people are eating. Things like flax seeds as well, a couple of tablespoons a day, just to help support the gut and get fiber in there. Healthy fats, I think Dr. Conway mentioned omegas. 2 or 3 oily fish a week, foods like nuts, seeds, olive oil, eggs, avocado, olives. If you don't eat those foods or you don't eat oily fish, then an omega-3 supplement might be a good thing to have a look at. Choose your red meat as well wisely. So just, red meat max once a week. There's nothing wrong with eating it, but try and make sure you're buying, good quality grass-fed, rather than the sort of cheaper meats. And that's to do with sort of how it's, what it's been, hormones and growth hormones and things like that it's been impacted in, or antibiotics that are in it, but just good quality meat. And an anti-inflammatory nutrient. So think of like the blue and black foods. So blueberries, blackberries, all those sorts of dark berries. If you can get foods like purple sweet potatoes, which are out at the moment, instead of just your orange sweet potatoes, they're really great as well. Curcumin as well, which is the active ingredient that's found in turmeric. Quercetin, so that's in apples, those dark coloured berries again, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, those sorts of things. Somebody's going to ask me now that I've said that about goitrogens, I'm sure. But carotenoids, if somebody wants to know, we'll get onto that. Carotenoids and flavonoids are again found in those dark green vegetables, so things like your kale, spinach, bok choy, watercress, broccoli, things like that. Beta carotene, so your orange foods, carrots, mangoes, orange, yellow peppers, things like that. Bromelain, very anti-inflammatory enzyme found in pineapple as well, and carnosol, particularly found in rosemary. So we've touched on the herbs and spices, but the carnosol and rosemary is really good as well. So getting lots of those in, as many as you can, maybe 3 at least a day, but as much as possible. You can do anti-inflammatory teas as well. So things like ginger, lemon, honey, turmeric milk, chamomile teas, green teas, all really beneficial. And the other thing, and this is why I don't like cutting foods out, is diversity in the diet. One of the biggest things we can do with nutrition is as much diversity as possible. And one thing that we do find in clinic with thyroid patients when they come through is that they actually have a less diverse microbiome. So we do microbiome testing in clinic. And generally they have a less diverse microbiome than the average person. And it's a bit of a difficult one to know whether this is because of the thyroid condition, or whether because of the thyroid condition, people have started cutting foods out. Cutting foods out will create a less diverse microbiome, and it's probably both. It's probably a bit of a mix. But diversity of the microbiome is really vital for thyroid health, immune health, energy, so much more. So it's really important to make sure you're getting as much in there as possible, and really simple ways of doing that. 2 new foods every time you go to the supermarket to do a food shop. Something that you've not had before, or you've not had for sort of 3 months. Just make sure every time you go, you're putting some new foods in there. Or another way of doing it is eating 2 of each color food a day. So the colors are red, orange, yellow, green, the blues and purples, and then the whites and tans. So 2 of each of those every single day, just to make sure you're really getting some diversity in there. We are creatures of habit. It's really easy for us to just have the same meals on repeat, and keep eating the same foods. We go to the supermarket and, we put broccoli, carrots and spinach in the basket. We do the same thing the following week. It's very normal. So just trying to think, what foods can you get in there? What could you get into the diet that you've not eaten for a while? Is just going to really help with that diversity. Very much though, agree with Dr. Conway, can't just rely on nutrition. We've got to look at that bigger picture. So we've talked about the importance of stress as a trigger. Stress management, really important. So things like breath work, 3-4-5 breathing is a really simple one. So just breathing in for 3, holding for 4, out for 5, 3 times a day, 10 breaths. Added points if you do it before meals, because it helps with digestion as well. Moving your body. So even if you're tired, we are designed to move. We are designed to do, I don't like calling it exercise. I like calling it movement, because a lot of people do struggle with exercise when they've got sort of fatigue and things like that. And again, how much we do is a bit personalized, particularly with the adrenals. Depends where your adrenals are at. We don't want you feeling really exhausted after it. You should be able to go home, have a rest and recover. So if you've not recovered by the following day when you've exercised, then after a good sleep, then it's too much. Simple things, mindful walks, just, whilst you're walking, turn your phone off, try and walk in nature. Just simple exercise to start with, particularly if you've not been exercising, build up slowly. Getting in nature as well, walks, gardening, playing with the dog, yoga in the garden, take the kids to the park, just really simple things that just get you moving. It doesn't have to be about intense exercise. And a morning and evening routine as well to really help set that circadian rhythm. So outside first thing in the morning, get some natural light into your eyes, help really get that cortisol moving. Slow evening, read instead of being in front of the TV for the last hour. Screens off, dark, cool rooms, all of those things that just really help us to wind down. If you have to be on screens, you could consider the blue light blocking glasses, but ideally try and get off the screens at least an hour before bed. Reading, is a good one, works for some people if you don't know what you're going to do in that last hour, or just you're getting ready for the next day. Just get anything to get away from those screens last thing at night. It's about finding a few things that work for you. I think that's the other thing. We hear a lot about journaling and affirmations and breath work, and we feel like we've got to do it all. Some things don't work for some people. I'm terrible at journaling. Everybody always assumes that I'm really good at all these things because of what I do. I can't journal to save my life. I hate it. It's not something I'm ever going to do. It works for some patients and they absolutely love it and it's brilliant for them. It's not for me. So it's just finding those things that work for you, and picking just a couple. And don't, I get patients that come back that they come in really stressed because they're like, I didn't manage to get the journaling done, but I did do the breath work and I did do this. And it's like, it's fine. It's okay. You don't have to do everything. Like it's little small steps. It's more about building resiliency and it's more about building consistency. So try not to have all these daily rituals, because we see so much, and particularly on things like Instagram and stuff like that these days, where people are living these Insta perfect lives. And, I don't know when they get all the work done, because they just seem to be spending their days doing, affirmations and breath work and journaling, everything like that. And the reality is we can't fit everything in. So try not to put pressure on yourself to match that sort of perfect life. Don't get stressed about it. Just small, simple, consistent steps that really help to just calm you down and keep you relaxed, and just find a couple of things that work for you.
Great. I think that's all sounds great. I'm listening to all of it. I'm like, yes, I'm going to do it all, but not for myself.
Not all, some of it.
Some of it. We've had a couple of questions, and there's one that I wanted to ask beforehand that had been asked via our email at Connect to the Thyroid Trust, which was just around alcohol and caffeine. So I don't know if either of you want to say anything about either of those, but that came, like I say, this is a question that was asked just before the event, just saying what was the kind of, if there was any advice around whether you should cut those things out completely, whether they are stresses or contributors in regards to managing your thyroid condition.
So my view is everything's about balance. So of course, too much caffeine, too much alcohol is not good for you. Also, I think the majority of my patients that I see are women in their mid-40s to 50s, and we don't manage alcohol well when it comes to menopause and perimenopause, and that is for various physiological reasons. So it kind of comes back to the stress hormone, doesn't it? It's about managing those cortisol levels, and caffeine isn't great for giving you a boost in cortisol when you don't necessarily need it. But once you're out the other side, that doesn't mean you can't have a cup of coffee. But it's perhaps something about it's where you are on that thyroid journey, really. So perhaps, and I think that's something that Nicole was saying, you know, I think Nicole probably sees people more at the beginning of the journey, and I tend to see them at the end when they've come out, they can't find anything else to do. And I see patients who've been gluten-free, dairy-free for 20 years and still are on their knees and miserable. And I just think, what the sodding hell are we doing to these poor people? But I think I certainly also think that in the beginning, having a good, clean diet for an amount of time to see if that gets you back up and out on your feet is a very, very good thing. So certainly if you're right at the beginning of your journey and you're struggling and you're ultra stressed and ultra fatigued and everything else, caffeine and alcohol is not going to be the best thing for you at all. Alcohol is a depressant as well, if nothing else. It's and it will kill all your microbiomes and etc. etc. So it's balance, always balance. But I definitely never tell to my patients they should have any more than 2 cups of coffee, and that's generally when they're well.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just add time. Yeah, I'd add timing of the caffeine as well.
Timing,
just I always sort of say to people, try and I mean, I love my morning coffee. I'm always gonna have a coffee in the morning. And as much as, you know, it's maybe not, I try not to have it on an empty stomach first thing. But I will have a coffee in the morning pretty much every day. I don't drink coffee after lunchtime. So kind of in the afternoon, again, that's just messing with sleep and those sort of cortisol levels. So yeah, timing of caffeine, no more than 2 cups a day. So I say the same with that. But there are some health benefits to caffeine as well. So to coffee, I should say, rather than the caffeine. So there are some health benefits. So again, balance. But yeah, just timing, I would add on that one. Alcohol, yeah, I would say early days, I do sometimes people will decide to kind of cut the alcohol, particularly if they're really bad. Does that mean you can never drink alcohol ever again? I think, you know, in the world we live in, that's unrealistic. So I will never kind of say to somebody like, you can't ever drink. Would we say, you know, look, let's try cutting it out for 3 weeks and see how you feel? Yes, maybe we would do that, particularly if they're drinking quite a lot. Because some people do struggle with kind of cutting down slowly, and just find that actually saying, you know, I'm just gonna not have it for 3 weeks and see how I feel, and then they feel the benefits of not having it, and then they're like, actually, you know what, maybe I will just go back to just having, like, you know, just a glass, and rather than having, you know, a little binge session on a Friday night. So it can be useful. Is it realistic that people are not going to drink? No, it's, you know, in the world we live in, it's not realistic. Everything in moderation, I think, is key. Yeah, and to to touch on what Dr. Conway said about the gluten. Yeah, absolutely. I get people who come into clinic who have been gluten-free for years and haven't, are still struggling. Usually there's some other root cause going on that has been missed. The thing with gluten, it is that first step that is worth trying, because a lot of people get a benefit from it. And that's why it's sort of one of those things that we can put in as generalized advice. If you haven't tried it, give it a try and see if the fatigue gets better. Or the brain fog. So a lot of people get improvement with brain fog when they cut gluten. Is it everything? No, there's lots of other root causes. If you've got any of those other root causes going on, and that's sort of building up in there, and just cutting gluten is not going to be enough.
Okay, it's good. Right, this leads me on to the first question from the chat this evening, in regards to one of the patients that they were diagnosed with underactive thyroid in April, but nothing mentioned about Hashimoto's. Do they need to go back and ask, because they've started medication but they're not yet stable?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing I would say is, have you had the antibodies tested? If you haven't, go back to your doctor and see if they will do the antibodies. If your doctor won't do them, get a private thyroid blood panel done. Absolutely vital that you know whether whether it's Hashimoto's, whether you've got the antibodies or not.
Yeah.
So the issue with the NHS is they will only test one of the types of antibodies anyway. So they will only test thyroid peroxidase. So I actually, it's one of the audits I want to do on my group of patients now, is to see how many of my Hashis patients have actually only got thyroglobulin antibodies, and see therefore how many that the NHS are missing, because I suspect it's a huge amount. So yes, for goodness sake, go and ask them and see if they'll do it, but it will only rule out one of the antibodies that causes it. I suspect there are others that we don't know about as well, but obviously at the moment we don't know, so we can't test for them. But for goodness sake, go and ask and at least get that one tested, and then we can see where you're at from then on.
Excellent, thank you. And then one of the other patients has asked, how do you know if you have reactivated Epstein-Barr virus? They've had positive antibodies for it, but was told it was from a previous infection. If it's reactivated, how would you reduce a viral load?
So we can test. I say we can test. NHS won't test. We test actually by using labs abroad. So in functional medicine, we use a lab abroad to test a full EBV panel. We can tell from the different markers that come up whether we're sort of looking at a current infection, a past infection, or whether it might be reactivated EBV. So that's how we would get it's a blood test. It's a simple blood test, so it's easy enough to do. And we run that for people all over the country, so we can send the kits out to people and get a phlebotomist out and get that done. And then we just send the samples abroad. Their testing is way more advanced from what we have here. If you've had positive antibodies, what was the second part? Positive antibodies, but told that it was a previous infection.
Or do you lower a viral load?
Yeah. So if it's a previous infection, you don't need to lower viral load. I think she said she was told it was previous. I would question where the testing was done, whether it was the English testing, the British testing, whether it was the NHS or whether it was the sort of from a lab abroad, because here they will only test if it's a previous infection. And actually, to test whether it's reactivated, you will have the markers of previous infection as well as the markers for reactivated. So if you've only tested for previous infection, that's not telling you whether it's reactivated or not. It's just telling you that you've had it previously. So I would just question where that testing was done and how comprehensive a panel was done. That would be the first thing. If it is just a previous infection, then you don't need to lower viral load. EBV is one of these viruses. It's coming up a lot as being, it has now been found in science to be acting as a trigger for quite a lot of the autoimmune disorders, particularly things like thyroid and MS. So if it does come up, there is a lot that we can do with antiviral support. We get EBV down in a lot of patients. It's something that we do a lot in clinic, but it is something you need to work with a practitioner on. It's not something that it's not something that I would give generalized sort of advice over. It's we use very targeted stuff, and and quite strong doses of stuff. So we need to know your full medical history and make sure we're doing that properly.
And just to be clear, is that the virus that causes things like glandular fever?
Yeah, and 90% of the population have had it. So it's not, having everybody's getting a little bit scared of EBV. If most of us in our lifetime will have EBV and will have that previous infection come up on a blood test, because EBV is a virus that once it's in your body, it stays in your body. So it will be there as a previous infection if you've had it. And that's very normal for us as humans. 90% of us will have that. The issue is if the viral load gets higher and we're getting reactivated EBV, or if it's a new trigger and it's just recently triggered, an autoimmune sort of condition or thyroid condition, that's when we sort of can work at getting that viral load down.
Okay.
And sorry to interrupt, one of the ironies, maybe is that the right word, of the thyroid is that actually, and this is where I sort of possibly disagree a little bit, is that actually thyroid hormones themselves, if you are hypothyroid, or if not even blood work hypothyroid, if you are not well treated with your hormones, your EBV and other underlying viruses are more likely to be reactivated. So one of the roles of thyroid hormone itself, and good, adequate, optimal thyroid hormone, is actually it suppresses viruses. So actually what we find is that it may be the reason that people are getting reactivated EBVs isn't because, as you say, Nicole, we've all probably had EBV at some point. We will all have positive EBV immunoglobulins, but it's actually quite likely the reason it's being reactivated is because they're not well treated in the first place. And so actually it's not just about getting rid of that EBV, it's actually about getting that hormone balance optimal. And unfortunately, the NHS don't do that well at all. And it's how we can help that to happen better. But we're a million miles from that as we are at the moment.
Yeah. And would that be the same for other viruses, just out of curiosity, and things like that can live in, like, as far as I understand?
So shingles, for example, is a really big one.
Herpes, those sorts of things, it can be the same. Okay.
So I had just as an example, I had a patient really right back at the beginning of my clinic, and I hadn't really sort of ever considered that recurrent shingles could be connected to thyroid. She'd had recurrent shingles since the birth of one of her children, 17 years prior to seeing me. She was having recurrences every single month. And we literally, I mean, she's not on Levo now, she's on, I think, Armour. But we started not even optimal levothyroxine to begin with, and her shingles stopped, literally like that. So it is one of the functions of thyroid hormone. It will suppress those reactivating viruses.
Okay, thank you for that. We've got a question now that says, can I ask if there's a methodology to discovering what caused the thyroid condition? It doesn't run in this particular patient's family. I'm wondering if, in regards to a broader approach to treating one's health, I guess it's one of those we talked about. You've both talked about stress. I say, as a thyroid patient myself, it doesn't run in my family either. So I suppose you're always looking for what's the trigger. And I mean, stress we've talked about is one factor. Is there any other kind of methodology to discovering what's caused it?
I don't think we have any methodology for how we can actually find out what causes it individually, not that I know of yet, short of testing every single virus, and Nicole may know more about this, but the theory is that it is often viral underneath it all. So Epstein-Barr is a biggie that's known to trigger Hashies. But it also depends if we're talking, I don't even know if we're talking about Hashies. There's all sorts of conditions. If it isn't autoimmune, if we're looking at hypothyroid, there's all sorts of other issues that can cause things with hypothyroidism. So just simple malfunctioning of the thyroid gland itself, radiotherapy. I mean, there's too numerous to mention. So I don't know in this particular patient, it's a bit difficult to know. But it is all about regarding to how a broader approach to treating one's health is exactly what we've just been talking about. So keeping those stress levels down, keeping nutrients, good diet, monitoring sleep, etc. So yeah, I don't know if that's particularly answered the question, actually.
No, I think one of the other things that's come up previously with when we've done these sessions is endocrine disruptors, and whether that can be a cause of someone developing thyroid disease. Don't know.
Nicole, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, just on the methodology bit, I guess from a functional medicine perspective, the first time that I see somebody, we do we build a timeline of a person's health history. It's not like having a test to sort of say, like, we can test something and say this is where this is what caused your thyroid condition. But we can use that health history to sort of say, we might find times where there was a significant period of stress prior to somebody developing something, or they remember being ill with something prior to having the thyroid condition. So it can guide us on what might be going on for the person. It's not a test. There isn't a single test where we can sort of do a test on somebody and sort of say, this is what caused your thyroid condition. That being said, we do know certain things that can cause various different thyroid conditions. So we can look at those and sort of say, is this something that might be an issue for this person? By looking at that health history as well. So that's something that we do. It's not a definitive answer. It can just guide us and help us to sort of go in the right direction and maybe find some of those root causes for people, or things that were triggers, but it's not a test. And then I
think sometimes also it isn't always a totally helpful thing to find out what triggered it if you can't do anything about it. Because actually sometimes you just need to accept where you are right now, and where you are right now is what you can manage and what you can control. Whereas if we dig, it just feels if we go too much into it all, you start again. We have so many people who feel like they've caused it. Yeah. I don't want anybody to feel like they've caused their own condition, that they're to blame for it, because there's so many things. And if we did have a test, brilliant, but we don't. So yes, having a deeper understanding may be helpful, but I think often if we try and dig too much into our past, it ends up making us feel like we're to blame for it.
That's really good point and tip. Yeah, we hear that quite a lot. So I can see you've already answered this one, and I really appreciate that, Georgina. But someone's asked about cortisol levels and whether or not they can be managed. And I can see that you've said that yes, there is a saliva cortisol test you can do.
Yeah, various ones from various companies. We do one. I can't remember what the other. I mean, there's loads of them around. Medichecks will do them. There's 6 in a day as well, but I think 4 in a day is sufficient. There's loads of tests on saliva cortisols. Saliva cortisols are better than blood cortisols. Blood cortisols are there really to rule out Addison's and Cushing's. So they're very pathological tests. So often patients come to me and say, well, I've had my cortisol done and it was normal. It's like, well, yes, great. That tells me you haven't got Addison's and you haven't got Cushing's. Brilliant. That's a really good start to my clinic. But actually, it's looking at that nuance of what a saliva cortisol shows us and what's going on during the day, and not just a one-off. So they're actually really helpful. It doesn't necessarily mean we can medically, I'm not going to start giving you steroids. I think that's a dangerous alley to go down, but it means I know where you're at. We know where you're at and how we can support and what the likely timeline is of recovery as well. So they're useful tests.
Yeah, we do saliva adrenal testing. We do it on every thyroid patient. We always do a saliva cortisol test. There's a lot that you can from a sort of nutrition and functional medicine perspective. There's a lot that we do with the adrenals. We work a lot on the adrenals, on balancing them out. There's a lot of nutraceuticals that we use to help get balance back. So whether that's, some people might be high cortisol, so whether it's bringing it back down, or whether it's they've sort of gone all the way through and crashed out and the cortisol levels are low, and we need to get that sort of spike of cortisol back in the morning. It's really useful to know where a person's at, because there's particular nutraceuticals that we can use to either calm or elevate. So we do it on every thyroid patient that comes through clinic. We always run a saliva cortisol test.
Right, thank you. Any tips on circadian rhythms for when it's dark? Because obviously with the winter, I know the clocks have changed, which helps slightly. I'm just going to put it out there from a patient-to-patient perspective. I have an alarm clock that does it that slowly gets brighter in the morning. Just bought it relatively inexpensively offline. Or online, should I say. And that's what I use to help in the morning, so that you still get that, and you can do it at bedtime as well, so it gives you like an artificial sunset. But I don't know.
Yeah, I have one of those too. I love it.
Oh, there you go.
It actually completely rescued my mornings, because I hate the winter. I get very low in the winter. So yes, I think they're brilliant things. But also it's getting out. The moment that it is light, get yourself outside for 5-10 minutes. I have you can't see actually, but I'm up in the attic and I have a door here which I can open. It's like a bifold thing. And even if it's peeing it down outside, I will sit on my chair with a cup of tea and let that light come to me, so that I get those the whatever the rays. What are the rays called? Because actually even big windows block about 1,000 times the rays that you get from the sun directly, or just the light. So yeah, the sunlight things are brilliant. Those lights are brilliant. I love them. But the minute it is light, if you can get yourself some direct, not necessarily sunlight, the grey lights, the wonderful grey light that we have in the UK, but at least it's some light, so get some on your face.
Yeah, I would say the same. Ideally try and get natural light. The alarm clock lights are the alarm clock lights are good. And I think they can help, but I don't think anything is a substitute for getting outside. I would say, I mean, for me, having a dog is the best thing for that, because come, rain or shine, there's no choice. I'm going out in the garden first thing in the morning. So, but you don't, you can do that anyway. Just make yourself a cup of tea and just go and walk around the garden once. It's 5 minutes that makes a difference. I mean, obviously the longer the better, but 5 minutes will make a difference. So it is something people always say, oh, it's so hard. It is something that it's not hard really. It's just a case of braving the weather sometimes, and which may not be particularly pleasant, but it's something that is free and easy to do and implement. We generally all have 5 minutes where we can go and do something in the morning, just stood outside or just stood at the back door, or, like Dr. Conway was saying, you just open the back door and drink your cup of coffee, looking out of the back door at natural light, if you don't want to, get your hair wet.
Yeah, no, that's good advice. So get outside, get some natural light at some point in the day. There'll be some, even if it's overcast and grey.
And lumen, somebody's just said, that's the name that I was trying to remember.
Oh, there we go. And someone's just asked about full spectrum light bulbs as well, but I personally don't actually know what those are. So
I think again, it's get outside. Anything that's artificial won't be the same. Just get yourself outside. It's 5 minutes, you can manage it, even if it is raining.
And then just a couple of last ones. Just want to clarify, Nicole, when you were talking, I think you said about 5 thyroid conditions. I think you meant autoimmune conditions, because you tend to collect them. I know when we've done our talks before, you've talked about that, and like I say, if anyone wants to know more or listen to anything else in more detail that Nicole's done, they are on the YouTube channel for the Thyroid Trust. If you just go onto YouTube and type in the Thyroid Trust, you'll find them on there. But yeah, I think it was autoimmune, just to clarify.
Yeah. There's over 100 autoimmune conditions now. And they're not all really serious ones. I think that's important to say as well. A lot of people with thyroid will have something called like Raynaud's, where you get the cold white fingers, which isn't particularly, maybe not pleasant, but it's not the end of the world for everybody. So they're not all really serious things. But yeah, there is, with the autoimmunity, and autoimmunity is the autoimmune thyroid conditions is where I sort of specialize. We do know that if if that autoimmunity is left and it's running rampant in the body, we are running the risk of getting another autoimmune condition. Most people don't come to me with one autoimmune condition. Most people, by the time they get to me, because they've tried everything else and been around multiple, ologists and what have you, they by the time they get to me, they've quite commonly got 2 or 3 autoimmune conditions, thyroid being one of those. So it is the research says on average it's 5, but if you balance the immune system, that doesn't have to be the case.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Conway, question for you is, do you agree that antibodies should be tracked?
So this is probably where I differ. I don't think it's a bad thing. I also don't think it's a good thing. I guess with everything there's a balance. And one of the things that often happens, and I guess again, if I've got a 20-year-old who's coming to me with Hashies, it's probably not a bad thing to be monitoring those antibodies. By the time I've got to my 50, 60-year-old women, they're all like, oh, my antibodies have dropped. My antibodies were really high and now my antibodies have dropped. And it's like, isn't always a good thing, guys. And a lot of that is because actually once the thyroid is being attacked by the antibodies, it can actually mean if there's no antibodies suddenly left, that there's actually no thyroid left. So it isn't always a good thing that the antibodies have dropped. It doesn't mean that if there's been some intervention at some point that's reducing those antibodies, that it isn't the intervention that's causing the reduction in antibodies. But if we've gone from 10 years having a high antibody test to 10 years later having negative antibodies, it's more than likely that you've got no thyroid left. So I have a number of 60-year-old women who've gone and got scans and they've basically got a completely bent out thyroid. It is gone, it is atrophied. So negative, so that's, and the other thing about monitoring antibodies is people get really, really stressed about it.
Okay.
And that's, again, what I don't want people to get. I don't want them stressed about anything. And they get very, very obsessed with their antibodies tracking. And actually, from day to day, they could go up. So if you were to test them one day and then test them the next, they might be different for no particular reason. So I don't have a problem at all with antibody tracking in a grand scheme of having an overall view of your thyroid condition. But I don't believe that they need to be tested every single time you have a blood. Now, I test my patients every sort of six weeks to 3 months in the beginning. I don't test their antibodies each time.
Okay.
Yeah, just I think just to sort of from my perspective, which is maybe slightly different. Yeah. And I agree with everything that Dr. Conway has said, because it can be other reasons. I guess the reason for tracking them from sort of our perspective is it gives us the idea of what's happening with the immune system. And when we're working with the autoimmune thyroid conditions, we're not just working on your thyroid, we're looking at balancing your immune system. So we're not tracking them every 6 weeks. We're tracking them maybe every 6 months or a year in some patients. So we're not tracking them super regularly. We track them. Really, the reason I think it's really important as well. The reason I always say to people, I think if people understand the antibodies, they don't get stressed about them. And the thing to understand with the antibodies is your antibodies, what we're trying to work on is your immune system. We want immune balance. So we want your immune system balanced. And when we're tracking antibodies, we also in clinic are tracking your immune function. So we have immune function tests as well. So we're tracking whether your immune function is overactive, underactive, or balanced. So we're not just looking at antibodies alone. And the thing with the antibodies is that I think if people understand it, they get less scared, is the antibodies are they're going around like a little red flag that your body puts into the thyroid tissue. So it's just being flagged. That doesn't mean, the antibodies do not mean that your thyroid tissue is being destroyed. They are flagging the thyroid tissue. The immune system is what will come out and mop up those cells that have been flagged. So I have patients who have really high antibodies. And this is why I say don't compare your antibodies to somebody else. Because I'll have somebody who comes who's got really high antibodies, but we've managed to get their immune balance really good. They're not overactive, they're not underactive. They've just got a really good balanced immune system. And they're actually getting very little thyroid, when they go for scans, very little thyroid damage, even though they've got a lot of antibodies because they've got a lot of red flags. If the immune system isn't coming out and mopping up those flagged tissues, it doesn't really matter. But if you've got lots of red flags, being lots of those tissues flagged, and you've got an overactive immune system, that's when you're going to run into problems, because that's when you will get an atrophied thyroid. So it's not just about kind of monitoring sort of for disease progression so much. It's balancing it with looking at what are your antibodies doing, what is your immune system doing, how much are you at risk of damage because of those antibodies. And for some people, they could be high and you're at less risk. For other people, you could be at high risk if you've got a very overactive immune system. So we're not just looking at the one test alone. We're looking at it with that immune function, and we're also not doing it every 6 weeks. We're doing it kind of, it depends on the patient, but 6 months to 12 months, depending on what their last test showed.
And can I
think that's entirely reasonable.
Thank you. Can I just ask what test you use to monitor an overactive immune system?
Yeah, for the actual immune system, yeah, we have there's lots of different immune testing that we do. We have some from America, which is sort of, we're looking at autoantibodies. We also have just immune function testing. So it's all blood testing predominantly that we do. Mostly we do, yeah, for immune testing.
Okay. Which I think just leads me on to the final thing I just want to cover. So there was a patient that's put on here that they don't believe that they are optimal in terms of their thyroid levels. So the NHS is saying that their T4, T3 are fine, but they still have lots of symptoms, obviously, which we hear about a lot. How do you go about having that conversation? So you're still symptomatic, you're being told your blood tests are fine. How do you know, how can you work out, I mean, that optimal? I mean, I always say to patients, this is why tracking is really important, because you can work out where you felt good and what good looks like or feels like to you. But just from both of your perspectives, how could we advise and support that patient? What conversations should they be having with their doctors?
So I'm guessing from what she's saying, she's not diagnosed.
No, I think are diagnosed.
According to NHS, normal levels, my T4 and T3 are fine, but I suspect not optimal. I have many symptoms and family history. Do I stand a chance with my GP? If optimal is different for everybody, is the first thing I would say. And unfortunately, no matter what we do, so I'm going to give you my perspective as a doctor in the NHS and a doctor in and a doctor in the private clinic. Okay, so doctors in the NHS, when I work in the NHS, I work as an acute medic, I don't do general practice, I couldn't. We just want patients to be safe to go home that day from hospital. So if they have even if they haven't come in with a thyroid condition, if I test their thyroid and their T4 is 15, their T3 is 4, and I don't even mention a TSH, which is interesting, but let's make up a TSH. I barely even look at a TSH. If a TSH is 3, I'll be like, do you know what? They're safe. I'm going to let them go home. So that they are not vaguely optimal, but from a hospital perspective, they are safe. They're not going to die. And so it's not really what we do in acute medicine. We then take that to the GP, and you hope that the GP might go, oh, they don't look very optimal. Let's see if we can manage that a bit better. But the trouble is, in the NHS, that poor GP sitting here is firefighting that patient the next patient who needs to come in to see me in acute medicine who's ill. And so this poor patient may not be optimal, but there just isn't enough help or resources or doctors to manage this poor unoptimal patient within the NHS. So it isn't that they don't want to do it, they do, they just can't, and they don't also have the knowledge about it, and they also don't test T3, and they also don't test the antibodies very often, and as already we've said, they only test one antibody. So it isn't that they don't want to help, it's that they can't. They literally they're not allowed at the moment to test a T3. They're not allowed to test thyroglobulin antibodies. So what you can do is just it's very, very hard to get it properly treated on the NHS. The way to keep going is to keep asking and keep asking and keep asking, but you still may not get the help you need. And I have patients who come to me and we treat them with T3 or NDT or whatever it is they need to get them better. We manage them for 18 months and they said, okay, well, I'm going to go back to the NHS. They don't get anywhere. And also the NHS will then get stuck on the TSH anyway. And often when you're on T3 or NDT, your TSH is going to be suppressed. So they won't get beyond that either. So I'm not really giving you any good answers for how you're going to manage it with your GP, because it's going to be a very difficult it's going to be very difficult to get the help that you need what I would do is go and get a full thyroid blood test. So you're looking at your thyroid peroxidase and your thyroid globulin antibodies. Those two are going to give you the diagnosis. Especially if you've got a family history, chances are it is Hashimoto's or Graves or whatever it is we're looking at, autoimmune. And then get your T3 and T4 looked at, and then go, and at least you're then arming that you're giving the GP as much information as you can about where you're at, and hope. And if not, come and see us. And we'll help.
We always say to patients as well, you know, it's really important to log your symptoms as well, so you can take in, when you have that like 10 minutes with the GP, and you've got so much to sort of say, you can actually give them very clear, this is what's affecting me, this is when, this is how long, you know, all those sorts of questions that they need answering to give them a clearer picture as to what's going on.
Yeah, I think unfortunately it's really, I think it's sad that the answer to this question is sad, and I think that's that's really the that is the answer. It's not easy to get that help on the NHS, and unfortunately the answer is probably going private. We have a GP in clinic who you get 60 minutes with, and she works very sort of holistically with optimal ranges and things like this. The reality is the NHS, they don't have 60 minutes to give to every patient, particularly, as Dr. Conway said, for patients who we're looking, we are talking about optimizing, not life-saving. And whilst that, obviously they're going to prioritize the life-saving people, that doesn't help somebody who is really struggling because, you're not optimal. So unfortunately, I think it's a really sad answer to the question. But you're probably not going to get what you need through the NHS. And that is just the reality of what we see coming through clinic. The vast majority of people are really struggling with that.
Yeah. And I think that's all the questions. I was going to say, that feels like quite a low place to leave this evening, but all of your information has been really helpful, and I hope that the people that have joined us this evening will be able to take some of that away, and that will provide them with some information on how they can empower themselves and support themselves moving forward as thyroid patients. But I'd just like to thank everybody for joining us this evening, and like I say, if anyone's got any questions from the event, etc., you can contact us at Thyroid Trust by connect@thethyroidtrust.org. And yeah, thank you very much to you, Nicole and Georgina, for giving up your Sunday evening to come and talk to us. It's great. And as I mentioned, this has been recorded, so it will feature on the Thyroid Trust YouTube channel in due course. And thank you once again.